Let me start off with the definition of applied science. Applied science can be defined as a discipline that applies existing scientific knowledge to develop more practical, cheaper, faster, and better applications and innovations. Applied science has a broad scope of application and can almost be utilized in any geography and industry. Yet, in reality, there's huge inequality in terms of accessibility of applied science between developed and developing nations. We see developed countries reaping most of the benefits out of the latest innovations, and developing countries lagging seriously behind. The lack of access to applied science is seen to have a negative social, commercial, and environmental impact, and fundamental problems such as poverty and pollution can only get worse without timely remediation. To tackle the problem of accessibility, we have identified several components that can facilitate or limit access. For example, do people in developing nations have sufficient channels to connect to the outside world? Are the costs they pay for certain products justified? Do the government regulations favor accessibility? Does the infrastructure support the widespread of technological utilization? Answers to these questions vary country by country, but these are some of the points worth delving into. We've identified that accessibility is a key issue in applied science. And if we look into the whole process of applied science, so it's starting with generating ideas, screening ideas, to experimentation, commercialization, finally diffusion and implementation, the gist of the problem really exists within the very last stage. The idea of granting adequate access of applied science to those who need them the most dearly fascinates us. And so the focus point will be on dissemination of and increased access to applied science to the developing world, specifically within healthcare, which Nisha will explain why next.
Thanks, Ivan. So, as Ivan stated, we found that we wanted to focus on accessibility within healthcare. And once we decided that, we wanted to do some background research. So, based on our research, we found that increased access to applied science within healthcare, specifically to the developing world, is definitely a problem worth solving. In fact, there are millions of people in low income countries that are dying from the lack of affordable medicines. So, some background statistics. In poor countries, 90% of medicines are bought by individuals rather than the state. More than 200 million children worldwide under the age of 5 do not get basic health care, and this leads to nearly 10 million deaths every year from treatable diseases like diarrhea and pneumonia, which are virtually only problems in the developing world at this point. A survey of 36 developing countries found that even private sector patients paid 9 to 25 times international reference prices for lowest priced generic products and paid over 20 times for international reference prices for originator products. So the media has taken note of this as well. Based on a quote from the Pharmaceutical Journal in 2014, we found that a third of the world's population actually lacks access to essential medicines. And in many of these low and medium income countries, drug therapies are virtually unaffordable to those who need them most. Additionally, up to 90% of the population in developing countries purchase medicines through out of pocket payments, making medicines the second largest family expenditure, basically only after food. And this means when we look at, let's say, a low skilled government employee in Tanzania, they would have to pay an entire month's wages for a course of antibiotics to treat something like pneumonia. We see the effect of all of these statistics when we look at the life expectancy gap between rich and poor countries. A child born in 2012 in a low-income country can expect to live 63 years if they're a female and 60 years if they're a male. However, that same child, if they were born in a high-income country, could expect to live 80 years as a female and 76 as a male. So this is definitely a serious problem. Our solution to this problem is a potential venture that can create social and commercial impact to these low-income countries. We want to facilitate access to applied science within the developing world, and the way we want to do that is by taking drugs and therapies that are deemed obsolete in high-income countries and moving them into low-income countries in order to create life improvement. So our role essentially would be to act as the facilitator in the diffusion of scientific applications and innovations within the field of healthcare. And this will create a huge difference, we believe, in the lives of people in these low-income countries. This venture has 6 key aspects, the first of which is the partners. We would partner with hospitals, medical providers in developed countries and low-income countries, as well as distribution partners. Next, we have to look at the customers. Our customers can be hospitals, medical providers in these countries, or patients themselves. And once we decide that, we can create a distribution strategy that targets these customers. Another thing we have to look at is correctly identifying and collecting the drugs and therapies to be distributed, as well as overseeing them with the management team. This is a crucial part of our business plan in order to make sure that we do more good than harm in the long run. With all this together, we can have our core offering, which would essentially be life improvement through increased access to healthcare science in the long run. And the last 2 things we have to look at are cost structure and revenue streams. Our cost structure would lie mainly in operations and distribution. The variable cost would come from buying obsolete medicines and therapies. The revenue streams would come from selling these medicines and therapies for a low cost in those countries to create social and commercial value in the developing world.